The 1,970 seconds weren't just a golden age for horror, they were an era of cinematic danger, when filmmakers dared to cross boundaries not only of violence and fear, but of belief. It was a time when audiences walked into theaters expecting entertainment, but left feeling watched, uneasy, as if something had followed them home. In the shadows of pop culture, whispers began about certain films that felt too real, scenes that mirrored actual rituals, symbols that matched obscure orders, dialogue that echoed texts not meant for public eyes. These weren't just movies, some said. These were rituals wearing the mask of fiction. Across Hollywood, a peculiar trend emerged: stories of secret societies, satanic pacts, forbidden knowledge, cloaked in the language of cinema. But behind the screen, strange patterns lingered: directors who refused to explain their sources, actors who claimed to feel changed, props that weren't props at all, and always a sense that the audience had seen something they weren't supposed to. Many dismissed it as paranoia, a relic of the satanic panic era. But decades later, the discomfort remains, because these films weren't loud, they weren't obvious, and that's what made them terrifying. Their horror didn't rely on monsters, it relied on mirrors held up to secrets we weren't meant to see. So tonight, we reopen the real vault and dust off the forgotten whispers. From black masses caught on celluloid to cults that may have watched themselves on screen, this is not just a list, it's a descent into the occult undercurrent of horror cinema. Let's unravel 15 horror films that may have pulled their darkest scenes not from imagination, but from the real-world rituals of secret societies. Number 1. Häxan, 1922. The oldest horrors are the ones we once called education. Häxan isn't just a film, it's an illustrated lecture on witchcraft, blending documentary footage, dramatizations, and reenacted black masses. Released in 1922, it was banned in several countries for blasphemy, nudity, and its dangerously accurate depictions of satanic rituals. But here's the twist: it wasn't fiction. Danish director Benjamin Christensen based the film on academic demonology texts, including the 15th century Malleus Maleficarum and French inquisitorial manuals. The ceremonies shown complete with goat-headed idols, reversed Latin prayers, and fertility rites are real rituals lifted directly from medieval accusations. Some historians argue that Christensen wasn't condemning witchcraft, he was preserving it. The film's tone is oddly reverent. The attention to ceremonial details is exacting. Several sequences show rites that weren't publicly documented until decades later, raising questions about Christensen's sources. In one infamous scene, a priest gives communion in reverse. That image alone was enough to get the film banned in the US for decades. Christensen later claimed the rituals were symbolic, but when asked who had designed the costumes and altar layouts, he simply said, "I didn't design them, I copied them." Häxan is not a warning, it's a record. And some films weren't made to frighten, they were made to remember. Number 2. Hereditary, 2018. Not every legacy is worth inheriting. Hereditary shocked audiences with its portrayal of familial grief, only to gradually unveil its true nature: a meticulously orchestrated demonic enthronement by a hidden cult operating in plain sight. But what made it so disturbing wasn't just the gore, it was the precision. The sigils drawn on the walls, the hand gestures, the chant phrases, all align with real demonological texts, particularly those linked to the worship of Paimon, a lesser king of hell, cited in grimoires like the Lesser Key of Solomon. Director Ari Aster confirmed he did months of research, including borrowing from both real and invented rituals. But scholars noticed something else. The symbols and language weren't just based on real texts. They were often word-for-word accurate, including phrases not widely available in English until recent years. Some of these translations only appeared in academic circles in the early 2000s. So how did Aster get them? More unsettling. The film treats the cult's success as inevitable. There's no twist, no heroism, just the cold fulfillment of a centuries-old rite. It suggests something deeply unsettling. The ritual was never about convincing you. It was about completing itself. Number 3. Kill List, 2011. At first, it's a hitman story. Then, it becomes something ancient. Kill List begins as a grim crime thriller. Two ex-soldiers take on a contract to eliminate targets. But as the film unfolds, it descends quietly, then violently into a labyrinth of symbols, disappearances, and a nameless cult with ties to British aristocracy and pre-Christian rites. The final act is unforgettable. A masked ceremony, a torch-lit hill, and a victim chosen not for justice, but for transformation. Director Ben Wheatley claimed the story was fictional, yet many of the symbols used the triple spiral, The inverted staves appear in British esoteric circles, including 1,970 seconds. Druidic offshoots rumored to practice willing sacrifice. One former location scout claimed that the cave used for filming had old hand-carved patterns in the walls that weren't in the script but were kept in the film. More curiously, the script never names the cult, never offers an explanation. That omission is the most terrifying part. Some secrets aren't buried. They're left just under the surface, waiting for those who recognize the sign. And Kill List doesn't show us a cult. It shows us a system that's always been there, patient, methodical, and hungry. Number 4. Rosemary's Baby, 1968. Sometimes the devil's in the details. Other times, he's in the production notes. Rosemary's Baby is perhaps the most famous film about a woman impregnated by a satanic cult. But beyond its terrifying plot lies something darker, a pattern of reality bleeding through fiction. Roman Polanski adapted the story with meticulous care. The rituals in the film, while stylized, mirror actual satanic fertility rites detailed in Renaissance-era grimoires, particularly those banned by the Vatican. The layout of the cult's apartment, the blend of herbs used by Minnie, even the specific chant structures, these weren't invented. They were sourced. But the real fear came afterward. The film's composer died mysteriously. Polanski's wife, Sharon Tate, who had lobbied to play Rosemary, was brutally murdered in a case later linked to apocalyptic cult ideology. The lead actor, John Cassavetes, reportedly left the set shaken after shooting the dream sequence. Some say the film was cursed. Others believe it was too accurate. One New York historian later noted that the building used in the film, the Dakota, had real occult associations tied to secret societies operating in the early 20th century. Rituals were said to have been held in its upper floors, long before Polanski chose it as the setting. The horror of Rosemary's Baby doesn't come from monsters. It comes from something quieter. The idea that maybe, just maybe, the cult didn't need to be written. It had already been cast. Number 5. The Believers, 1987. The scariest cults are the ones that blend in. When a psychologist's wife dies in a freak accident, he and his son move to New York only to stumble into a world of Santeria, child sacrifice, and political corruption. The Believers doesn't just hint at occultism among the powerful, it draws a direct line between ritual magic and elite influence. But what unnerved critics wasn't the plot, it was the execution. The film's rituals, marked by animal entrails, protective sigils, and trance possession, were portrayed with such accuracy that several Afro-Caribbean spiritual leaders condemned the film not for misrepresentation, but for revealing too much. Screenwriter Mark Frost claimed to have researched the film through interviews, but others involved mentioned an unnamed consultant who brought actual ritual items to set, including a bowl said to contain grave dirt and water from the mouth of the dead. Even more chilling, multiple crew members fell ill during production. 2 suffered seizures on set. The lead actor refused to shoot the final scene unless a protective blessing was performed beforehand. The film ends with an exorcism and a political cover-up. In real life, the studio quietly distanced itself from marketing the film internationally, citing sensitivity to cultural beliefs. But the whispers persisted. The Believers doesn't ask if cults exist in power, it asks how many of them wear suits and how many children were ever really missing. Number 6. Society, 1989. What if the elite don't just rule, but feast? Society follows a privileged Beverly Hills teenager who slowly realizes his wealthy family may belong to something far worse than an exclusive country club. What begins as paranoia becomes grotesque revelation, culminating in one of horror's most disturbing finales. A body-melding ritual of the rich, literally consuming the poor. Director Brian Yuzna claimed the story was a satire of class divisions, but the details are too precise to be dismissed as parody. The shunting ceremony where bodies liquefy and merge into a communal flesh form isn't found in fiction. It appears, with eerie similarity, in a banned 1,930 seconds text on alchemical transcendence attributed to a fringe sect within pre-World War II European aristocracy. The concept, by merging bodies, a group could dissolve identity and absorb essence, becoming one immortal will. How Yuzna or the screenwriter tapped into such specific, arcane imagery is unknown. But special effects designer Screaming Mad George stated in interviews that he was given reference diagrams from a private source, rather than creating designs from scratch. Critics saw the film as surreal body horror, but some researchers point to old tabloid reports from the 50 seconds, alleging elite gatherings in the Hollywood Hills, where rituals of rebirth took place involving synthetic fluids and sensory deprivation. Satire, or a peek behind a curtain not meant to be opened, because once you've seen society, the real horror isn't what it shows. It's what it suggests you've always suspected. Number 7. Messiah of Evil, 1973. Coastal towns keep secrets, and sometimes they eat them. Messiah of Evil opens with a woman arriving in a seaside town to find her missing father. But what she uncovers is a place where the dead walk in silence and the living worship a coming darkness. With surreal lighting and dreamlike pacing, the film feels like a painting left to rot. But behind the aesthetic lies something far more calculated. Several horror historians have noted that the town's structure, the coded murals, and the blood moon gatherings resemble accounts of a real West Coast spiritualist group active in the late 1920s, known only as the Brethren of the Empty Sea. Though never officially confirmed, archived production notes reveal the script was inspired by a real, unpublished journal of a California mystic. The journal allegedly described seaside rituals that allowed passage from man to myth and insisted that coastal air was thinnest, where gods once walked. Even the film's title, Messiah of Evil, mirrors the group's belief in a returning prophet who would arrive by ocean and remake the world in silence. The film never names its cult. It doesn't need to. Its horror lies not in what it shows, but in the echo that lingers after the credits roll. A whisper that some towns really do forget the rest of the world on purpose. Number 8. The Wicker Man, 1973. Not all cults hide. Some sing A Scottish Island, a missing girl. A community ruled not by law, but by pagan ritual. The Wicker Man is not a horror film in the traditional sense. It's a folk ceremony disguised as cinema. As a Christian detective investigates the islanders, he becomes prey to their traditions, culminating in one of the most iconic finales in horror history. The film's power lies in its authenticity. Every chant, every maypole, every costume, the details are painstakingly sourced from actual Celtic and Neo-Druidic texts, some of which were privately held and untranslated. Director Robin Hardy and screenwriter Anthony Schaefer reportedly consulted members of a real British pagan society to ensure accuracy. One consultant later revealed to be a practicing Druid refused to be credited and warned, "If you film it wrong, you'll only offend. If you film it right, they'll know you did." The line, "they'll know you did," has haunted folklorists ever since. Strangely, several actors reported strange energy on set, particularly during the final scene's filming, where production was delayed by 2 days due to unexplained audio failures. Unlike most cult films, The Wicker Man doesn't invent its horror, it resurrects it. And if the fire feels real, it's because it was built from beliefs that never truly died. Number 9. All the Colors of the Dark, 1972. Sometimes paranoia is just perception waiting for proof. All the Colors of the Dark is a fever dream of psychological terror. It follows Jane, a traumatized woman who, after a miscarriage and a car crash, begins seeing hooded figures and hallucinating violent rituals. Her boyfriend calls it psychosis. But as Jane is drawn into a real cult in London, one that promises healing through sacrifice, the film becomes something else entirely, a portrait of spiritual invasion disguised as salvation. Italian giallo films often flirt with surrealism, but this one lingered in something colder structure. The ritual scenes weren't flamboyant, they were procedural. Candle placement, body positioning, incantations derived from real 15th century folk rites, many of which had never been translated publicly. Critics dismissed the film as incoherent, but decades later, researchers noted eerie overlaps between the film's rituals and a London-based esoteric order dissolved in 1968, which believed trauma opened the soul for transference. How did screenwriters in Rome get access to texts that weren't even cataloged until the 1980 seconds? Why do certain symbols match diagrams found only in private museum collections? Jane's journey isn't just about madness, it's about being chosen and why. And if the line between nightmare and memory fades, maybe it's because the dream wasn't hers to begin with. Number 10. Eyes Wide Shut, 1999. Kubrick never made mistakes. He made choices. At first glance, Eyes Wide Shut is a surreal drama about fidelity and temptation. But as the masked ball unfolds cloaked figures, ritualistic sex, choral chants in reverse, Latin, a darker question emerges. What did Kubrick know, and why was this his final film? The infamous orgy sequence is said to mirror an actual initiation rite of a European order known to recruit elites. The symbols, the chant structure, even the choreography of power and submission all align with leaked documents later cited by conspiracy theorists and occult historians. Kubrick was famously precise. Nothing made it on screen without intention, yet he refused to discuss the scene in interviews. He also submitted the film just days before his death, which some still call suspicious. Rumors claim the original cut was longer, more explicit, and that Warner Brothers forced changes. But what remains is enough to disturb. One production assistant claimed a real ritual consultant visited the set and asked for no credit. Another said the mansion used for filming had sealed rooms not shown in the film. Kubrick pushed boundaries, but Eyes Wide Shut felt less like a boundary pushed and more like a veil lifted. Number 11. The Initiation of Sarah, 1978. Televised once, remembered forever by those who saw too much. Marketed as a supernatural teen thriller, The Initiation of Sarah tells of a shy freshman drawn into a college sorority only to discover it's a front for a psychic cult. What begins with petty rivalry descends into telekinetic duels, ceremonial cloaks, and blood-soaked rites of passage. But the controversy wasn't the plot, it was the ceremony. Several former university students claimed the initiation sequence in the film mirrored real rituals performed by secret women's societies, particularly in Southern collegiate circles. The scene featured an underground chamber, a blindfolded pledge, and whispered oaths in a dead language. Critics called it silly, but the scene was later cited in a real hazing lawsuit, suggesting the portrayal was uncomfortably close to reality. More disturbing, the screenwriter reportedly visited a real sorority's dark chapter house in Georgia while researching the script. What she saw was never disclosed, but afterward, she refused interviews for years. During broadcast, several local stations pulled the film midway, citing complaints from religious viewers. Others aired it only once, never to rerun again. It wasn't graphic. It was accurate. Too accurate. Some horror lies in exaggeration, but The Initiation of Sarah became infamous for knowing just enough to feel like a reenactment, not a drama. Number 12. The Mephisto Waltz, 1971. Not all horror screams. Some of it plays in a minor key. The Mephisto Waltz is a story of ambition, possession, and the price of genius. A failed pianist becomes entangled with an elite music critic, only to discover that the man belongs to a satanic order whose members exchange souls to cheat death. The climax? A ritual in which the critic's dying soul slips into the young man's body, using music as the medium of transfer. To some, it was just elegant horror. But for occult scholars, the Mephisto Waltz raised red flags. The ritual of soul transfer portrayed in the film, involving a specific nocturne by Liszt, is not fictional. It appears almost verbatim in an obscure German grimoire from the 1940 seconds, written by an alleged member of the Thule Society. The rite combines tonal resonance, bodily sigils, and sacrifice of identity exactly as shown in the film. No screenwriter ever claimed to have read this book, yet the similarities are uncanny. Even the visual arrangement of ritual elements, candles, mirrors, sheet music placed over bone match a diagram never published in English until decades later. Then there's the actors' accounts. Alan Alda once mentioned in an interview that the director demanded they rehearse in silence under a crescent moon. No explanation was ever given. It's a film that doesn't ask for fear. It demands attention. And if you listen too closely, you might hear a note that wasn't in the score. Number 13. The Seventh Victim, 1943. Some films predict the future. Others seem to remember it. Long before mass suicides like Jonestown or Heaven's Gate, The Seventh Victim portrayed a secretive urban cult whose members willingly chose death over exposure. Shot in moody black and white and released in 1943, the film follows a young woman searching for her missing sister, only to uncover a palladist society hiding among Manhattan's elite, bound by an oath of silence, secrecy, and self-sacrifice. What makes this film chilling isn't just the subject matter, it's the restraint. The cult isn't theatrical. There are no capes or pentagrams, just soft-spoken men and women in tailored clothing whispering of freedom through death. It feels real. Film historians have long noted the eerie parallels between the cult's ideology and real secret societies rumored to exist in New York during the 1930 seconds, particularly among certain intellectual circles obsessed with theosophy, Gnosticism, and Eastern mysticism. Some critics at the time dismissed it as too quiet to be scary, but in hindsight, that quietness was the point. The cult's power came not from spectacle, but from social invisibility. Director Mark Robson never commented on the script's origins, but screenwriter Charles Bennett was known to have collected rare occult manuscripts during his time in London. One of which, discovered posthumously, detailed rituals of voluntary disappearance, matching the film almost word for word. Perhaps the film wasn't warning us of something to come. Perhaps it was revealing something already here. Number 14, The Brotherhood of Satan, 1971. This film doesn't scare you with gore, it scares you with certainty. In a quiet desert town, children vanish without explanation, while their parents die in grotesque, inexplicable ways. The local priest suspects something deeper than crime, a spiritual invasion, but by the time he realizes the truth, it's already too late. The town has been overtaken by a secret society of elder occultists, using dark rites to transfer their consciousness into youthful bodies. Released in 1971, The Brotherhood of Satan was largely ignored by critics. But among cult researchers and fringe historians, the film carries a reputation, not for what it invents, but for what it reveals. The rituals depicted complete with black altars, specific astrological alignments, and chants in pre-Christian dialects mirror real accounts from a fringe group operating in Northern California during the 1960 seconds. A group that, according to some, vanished just months before filming began. No official connection has ever been proven, but production notes show the screenwriters spent several weeks in the exact area the cult once claimed. One former assistant recalled that the director insisted on absolute fidelity to ritual details not available in books at the time. The film never names the cult. It never needs to. What makes The Brotherhood of Satan disturbing is that it feels less like fiction and more like confession. A record of something old and hungry, filmed with unnerving precision. Number 15, The Devil's Reign, 1975. Before Satanic Panic had a name, this film gave it a face. The Devil's Reign follows a desert cult that traps souls in a waxy limbo, worshipping a demonic figure and hunting defectors with relentless devotion. The film's bizarre visuals, melting flesh, black-robed ceremonies, desert altars are unsettling enough. But what haunts this film isn't just what's on screen, it's who was behind it. Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan, served as the film's technical advisor. He didn't just advise, he appeared on screen, fully robed, overseeing rituals that he himself performed in real life. Rumors persist that scenes weren't staged, but documented, that what we saw was a real invocation, captured under the guise of fiction. Even stranger, several cast members, including William Shatner and Ernest Borgnine, described feeling drained during production. One even claimed to have recurring nightmares of LaVey's ritual chants. The line between performance and practice had blurred. Audiences in 1975 dismissed it as camp. But in retrospect, the details are too meticulous, too confident in their blasphemy. Who gave the writers access to the specific Latin invocations? Who designed the sigils used in the ritual scenes? This wasn't a satire of Satanism. It felt more like a snapshot of something ancient, indifferent, and real. Bonus fact: Dark Waters, 1993. Some films don't rise to the surface. They leak up from below. Filmed in the crumbling monasteries of post-Soviet Ukraine, Dark Waters is an obscure 1993 horror film that was barely released outside of Europe. On the surface, it's about a young woman investigating a remote religious order after her father's death. But as she delves deeper, she uncovers a subterranean cult worshipping an ancient, ocean-born goddess and something imprisoned beneath the earth that shouldn't have survived. What makes Dark Waters unforgettable isn't just its Lovecraftian atmosphere, it's the ritual architecture. Many of the monastery interiors weren't sets, they were real, decaying convents unused since the Cold War. The production team reported finding strange carvings, sealed tunnels, and even ritual implements buried in nearby walls. The director, Mariano Bino, refused to comment on whether these were planted or discovered. Even more unnerving, several of the film's ritual chants, believed to be gibberish written for sound, were later identified by linguists as fragmented Enochian phrases, the angelic language from occult grimoires of the 16th century. When asked how these made it into the script, Bino claimed they were pure coincidence. The final act depicts an underground chapel, dripping with seawater, where nuns perform rites to the daughter beneath the waves. But scholars of Slavic mysticism noted that this character eerily resembles an undocumented sea deity referenced in suppressed Baltic texts, long thought to be apocryphal. No one knows how this micro-budget film managed such detail, such accuracy, or such conviction. But it lingers. Dark Waters never explains its horror. It simply shows you the tunnel and lets you walk in. Some horror films scare us because they imagine the impossible. Others terrify because they never had to imagine anything at all. From whispered rites to shadowy consultants, these 15 films may have drawn from sources no script should ever touch. But what do you think? Were these just coincidences and clever writing? Or did some filmmakers leave behind a record of rituals we weren't meant to see? Tell us in the comments. Which of these films felt too real to be fiction? And which ones do you believe crossed a line and maybe, just maybe, paid the price for it?